My word. A panel game devised by Tony Shrine and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words, with Jack Longland in the chair.
We go straight into the first round, which is about words, newish words, coined within the last decade. And for 2 marks, what would you suppose or expect to be the meaning of the following words? We begin with Frank Muir. Pizzazz.
A sleepy pizza.
No, it's very much the opposite.
Is it American?
Yes, I think so.
Is it one of those razzmatazz kind of words?
Yes, that's right.
It's all, come on, let's have some pizzazz.
Yeah.
That's right.
Advertising men use it over here.
Well, there we are.
I haven't had a definition yet.
Well, it means a pizzicato. It means it's very quick and furious and let's get moving, huh? Let's have some pizzazz. Okay? Okay.
I've got 5 words written down here, none of which you've mentioned.
You can't lose them all. Next round will be different.
1.5. Pep, vitality, go, with-itness, zest, with a slightly flashy flavour. All right, now, Anne Scott James, your turn. Girlcott, Girlcott, a verb.
To Girlcott?
Yes.
I can't believe it's anything so corny as the female of boycott.
It is?
Which doesn't mean to ban boys, actually, does it? This must be something to do with the anti-sex discrimination bill, I'm sure.
That sort of thing. What would you Girlcott?
I don't think it's legal to discuss this matter at all. I greatly doubt it. You would, Girlcott a boys' public school, I should think.
Yes, that's fair enough.
Yes, part of this thing about making it Old Lady River and...
But I think German Greer will probably have us up. We'll be in the
Jill in the box. What they're going to do about manhole cover, I don't know.
I think I close this pretty rapidly. Roughly, to indulge in a boycott against something or someone which is prejudicial to women or their interests. The opposite of boycott, 2 marks. Denis Norden, and this is not intended personally, please, KREEP. K-R-E-E-P.
K-R?
That's right.
That's a fun... Creep, a Teutonic twit sort of thing, you know.
No, it's an acronym, actually, on...
K-R-E-E-P.
That's right. A very, very long journey. And you bring something back, sometimes.
Up to the heavens, it must be.
That's right.
Oh, I see. It's one of those space words.
Yes.
Oh, well, I didn't understand any of that.
Oh, it's the dust they got off the moon.
That's right.
Is it?
Yes.
Is it?
Yes. Well done. Well, a little... a little rocket-assisted, 1.5. It's a curious substance brought back from the moon by the astronauts, a yellow-brown, glassy material, mineral, called from its main ingredients. K stands for potassium, as I'm told. REE means a rare earth element, and P means phosphates. KREEP altogether. 1.5. Dilys Powell. Gigabit. G-I-G-A-B-I-T. Gigabit.
That would be the subtitle of a blue movie.
This is very much poorer than that.
Nothing more boring.
Well, this is very boring. It's about computers. I'll help you with that.
Is it when they keep stopping and starting as they go round? As they do in films. And they've never seen a computer, but they always seem to go... Chup, 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 and they jiggle it.
They break down.
It's when they send you somebody else's bank statement, I think.
When you get a bill from the water board for your hose of £128,000.
It's when they say you're $1 million overdrawn and you're a bit surprised.
Well, millions is getting right. Dilys, if you saw a big 10 with a teeny weeny little knife up in its right-hand shoulder, what would you think?
I think absolutely nothing.
Well, I've done my best.
Ten to the ninth.
10 to the ninth power.
Yes, which is an awful lot of tens when you get down to it, yes.
I think you get 1. In computerology, which itself is a beastly word, it's a unit of information equivalent to 1 billion bits. The bits are contraction, I'm told, of binary digits. And in case anybody writes in too quickly, billion is here in the United States sense, which means 1,000 million, whereas the British is a million, so I don't want to get that one wrong. Gigabit.
Oh, no, don't. We'll get on to literature soon. I trust nobody in this audience or listening would ever use any of these words.
Well, before we go on to the next round, here are your quotations for the last round of all. And Frank Muir, yours is, I'm going to see a man about a dog. And yours, Dennis, is, was this the face that launched 1,000 ships? Third round 2, which is called Something in Common. For 2 marks, what do the words or phrases in these groups have in common? Frank Muir, hurry up, enclosed herewith, mutual cooperation, and funeral obsequies.
They're all tautological phrases.
That's right. The adverb or adjective attached to the noun is quite unnecessary. It's only put in because it sounds grander, like enclosed herewith. Cooperation is quite enough without mutual cooperation. And Scott James, your turn. Speech, fear, want, worship.
They've all got vowels in.
True. Not relevant, but true.
How about a tiny hint?
Well,
They're all no, speech isn't a feeling, is
there
it?
was an American president once.
What's the for freedom?
Roosevelt, I should think.
I always think it should be freedom from speech. If you have freedom from want.
Well, let's sync this program.
Oh, yes.
No, I mean freedom from politicians.
Oh, I see, yes.
It should be the Fordham from
Yes.
freedom.
The 4th freedom was postulated by President Roosevelt in a speech on January the 6th, 1941. 1.5. Denis Norden. Excessive fatigue, sensations of pins and needles, enlargement of the heart, and vague gastrointestinal disturbances.
It's going up more than 6 stairs. I don't know, it sounds like a hangover.
It's a hang-under, I think.
I don't think I've had one. That's from having too little to drink.
Well, make it a bit more solid.
Oh, yes, it's a lack of something necessary in your diet, I should think.
They're all symptoms of a dietary deficiency in vitamin B1.
Lack of general pizzazz.
That's right. Dilys Powell, Jupiter, a bloodstain, a rear light, a clown's nose, and a mallard's eye.
They're all red.
Yes, absolutely right. 2 marks to 1. Well, now we get on to more serious stuff, because this is a round of Shakespearean fragments. For 2 marks, please complete the Shakespearean phrase, which is prefaced by the very small fragment I'm going to give you, and give me the play, if you can, from which the quotation comes. Frank Muir.
Now is the winter.
No, tomorrow. Tomorrow and tomorrow for you.
And tomorrow.
Mm.
Tomorrow and tomorrow. Oh, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Oh, yes, it's a speech full of quotation.
Yes.
It's out brief candle. And that it ends with a super description of party political broadcast, isn't it? A tale told by an idiot.
Signifying nothing.
Full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.
But you haven't got the next bit. It's tomorrow and tomorrow.
Reacting to news of Lady Macbeth's death.
That's right. And it is when Macbeth hears...
Filthy questions followed by dusty answers.
That's right. He's just heard of his wife's death and said she should have died hereafter, etc. And tomorrow creeps in his petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. 1.5. Anne Scott James.
Yes, that's the other.
Be thou familiar.
I think it's Hamlet.
Yes.
On the assumption that after Macbeth one's bound to have Hamlet. Be thou familiar, and it's Polonius.
Yes.
What's he say next?
Oh, that sort of be thou familiar but not vulgar, those
That's
friends thou hast, and their adoption tried, grapple them to thy soul with hoops of steel, neither borrower nor lend a bee.
This is splendid, yes. Well, that's good enough.
When do we get rich gifts for Prax poor?
No, it comes a bit later.
Oh, yes, that's later.
No, the next two lines are, but do not dull thy palm with entertainment of each new-hatched, unfledged comrade. 2 marks. Polonius to... Polonius' unsolicited advice to his son Laertes. Denis Norden. Sit, Jessica.
Oh, well, it's got to be the Merchant of Venice.
Yes.
And I don't know what comes off, but it's the speech about how sweet the moonlight falls upon this bank.
Yes, that's right.
Isn't it?
Yes, it starts with that. And this bit comes a little later.
And it's got the sounds of music. Sound of music comes from it. Sounds
That's
of
right.
music creeping on our ear.
Think about the floor of heaven.
Oh, he's got orbs. I really don't know that. I know. I sort of know it, but I can't remember. I don't know the word.
Well, you've got everything else right. 1.5 is straightforward, I think. Merchant of Venice, Act 5, really when everything comes home to Belmont and everything's gone right. Look how the floor of heaven is thick inlaid with patines of bright gold. There's not the smallest orb which thou beholdst, but in his motion like an angel sings, still choiring to the young-eyed cherubims. That's right at the end of Belmont.
What if John Gielgud was lost in you, Jack?
I knew I should get a nasty one from that. Now, Dilys Powell. This happy breed... What?
Something said in the Silver Sea.
That's right.
All the septic stuff, the septic aisle, set in
Yes?
Richard II.
Quite right. John of Gaunt in Richard II, Act 2. This happy breed of men, this little world, this precious stone set in the Silver Sea, which serves it in the office of a wall or as a moat defensive to a house against the envy of less happier lands. Well, now we have a round of differences. For 2 marks, what's the precise difference in meaning between these words? We begin with Frank Muir. Boondoggle and Hornswoggle.
Hornswoggle means to cheat.
Yes.
In a kind of Wild Western way.
Right, yes, absolutely.
And Boondoggle doesn't.
No, it doesn't. It's a noun, if that's any help.
It's boondoggle is kind of verbishly, it's sort of skiving, isn't it?
Yes.
In a boondoggle, it means to pretend to be busy and much ado about nothing.
Yes, that's pretty good. Yeah, you get your 2 marks. All right, Anne Scott James, your turn. Impromptu and extempore.
Well, extempore definitely means off the cuff, doesn't it?
Yes.
In speech.
Yes.
An impromptu might not be of speech, might it?
No, it needn't be.
It could be of action. It means unprepared in advance.
That's absolutely right. I think that's a perfect description, Anne. 2 marks straight away. Denis Norden, a big banger and a steady stater.
Well, that could also... It sounds like that could also describe politicians as a kind of one who pounds the table. The one who simply reads in a dull, monotonous voice. Is it the Big Bang Theory?
Yes.
I don't know what that is, but it's a theory. And it's to do with the universe.
Yes.
And it's either how we're going to end or or we started. I don't remember. But the name... But it's something to do with a chap called Fred Hoyle.
Series about the creation of the universe, the Big Banger, and this is Sir Martin Ryle, who's a rival of Fred Hoyle. The idea that the present galaxies resulted from an enormous cosmic explosion about 15 billion years ago, whereas Fred Hoyle, at any rate at one time, held the idea that as the galaxies move outwards and outwards towards infinity, new galaxies are always being formed out of hydrogen in space, so that the universe is kept at a constant density, and they've been fighting each other over these two theories for a very long time. 1.5. Now, Dilys Powell, Jimjams and the Jitters.
They both mean a time of moment of anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The jitters is a physical state.
No, you're the wrong way around.
Well, sorry, I beg your pardon.
Yes.
Well, Jimjams is a physical state.
Yes.
A physical state of deep anxiety.
Yes.
Jitters.
Mm-hmm.
I thought there's a tremulous state of the mind.
Yes, all right, that's what I wanted. Well, we now come to the last round, and Frank and Denis's quotations, and the marks will be awarded on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. And Frank, to remind you, your quotation is, "I'm going to see a man about a dog," which is, I think, a popular saying.
Actually, it's about a cat that I want to talk. I have a problem. Those who know me have noted that in the last few weeks, my hair above the temples, in fact above, on the side of, beneath, and in between the temples, is beginning to go grey. And the reason is we've got this kitten, you see. And up to now, I've been doggy rather than moggy. But somehow I've sort of transmogrified myself into having a cat in the household. And a bit of a problem has arisen. You see, he sleeps in the bed. In the bed, I might say, not on the bed, but in the bed. And around about 4 o'clock in the morning, there's a kind of thing with him, you know. He likes to sharpen his claws on a toe, anything similar. And I was lacerated from Adam's apple to ankle. No, not badly, you know. They drew a little blood, but audience could probably see them from there. Crisscrossed with these little lacerations. When I had the first bath after having the kitten, I looked like a woodcut from Fox's Book of Martyrs. That's it's okay now. I've got over that, because what I do is I sleep. I don't wear pyjamas, so what I do is I sleep in a lifeboatman's oilskin. Because the little claws can't get in, and they just slide away. And I've lost 1.5 stone in weight past 3 weeks, but that's got over that trouble. But when he's in bed, he purrs away, and it's sort of it's a Burmese kitten, and if you kick him because he's got your little toe in his tiny little sweet little needle teeth, you feel it. He sort of purrs in rhyme. He sort of goes, which I call perverse. And if he's fairly happy, he sort of goes for hours, and that's the persistent. If he wants me right out of the bed, he goes... and he keeps it up until you're out, and that's the persevere. But the trouble with the kitten is not the kitten per se. It's the fact we've got 2 Afghans, and how to get them together. You see, and about the 3rd day, I rang up the RSPCA and said to the chap, can you tell me how I introduce into a household of 2 Afghans a tiny Persian kitten? And he said, well, you hold the kitten and show the dogs that the kitten belongs to you, and they won't attack you or it while you're holding it. And you introduce it and you say, look, this has come to live amongst you. So I took him down for the dogs, and the kitten disappeared, and I had a blinding headache. It had fastened itself onto my head, sunk the scimitars into hair and scalp, and was stuck there. Well, it was a terrible day, I must say. There's about an hour later, a chap came to see me. Actually, it was a job that I'd agreed to do on the board of a local school, and he just wanted to see that I was a normal sort of reliable sort of chap, you know. And I went through the interview. It was only a formality, and I was turned down. Now, you would have thought at one stage of the interview, this man would have said, do you realise you've got a cat on your head? I couldn't get it off. I was describing this to the commissionaire, and he said, well, you want to talk this over with Dan? I said, Dan? He said, yes, he's marvellous. You know, Dan, he's a studio ablutions superintendent. He said, he's marvellous with animals. He said, dogs, mogs, giraffes, white mice. He said, Bobby, he could have been a veterinary physiatrist. He just does understand animals. You've got no trouble. Just talk to him. So I've got to cut the story short here and get away. It's terribly important, but I'm going to see a Dan about a mog.
There are times when I think the Muir household doesn't actually exist, and we'll go on to Denis Norden. And his quotation, if you remember, was this the face that launched 1,000 ships?
I was lying in the bath the other morning, and as is my custom, I was having some deep perceptive thoughts. You know, like, can you use a yo-yo on the moon? And I suddenly became conscious that Mavis Nicholson, who I was in the bath with, well, she wasn't actually in the bath, of course. She was perched on the soap rack, because that's another one of my customs. I always put the radio on the soap rack while I'm having a bath, and Mavis was on in one of these early morning whimsical talk programs. And I heard her say, I can remember every detail of my school days. And it suddenly occurred to me, I can only ever remember one detail of my school days. Banana sandwiches. To me, those two words sum up the whole of my school life. You see, I went to a day school, and at lunch times, every other kid there had been given money by his mum, and when the lunch bell rang, he'd take it down to the shop on the parade and spend it on a bag of chips. But not me. My mum gave me sandwiches. And always the same sandwiches. From the day I was a mixed infant to the time when I was comparing moustaches in the upper sixth, I only ever had one kind of lunch. 3 banana sandwiches and an apple. Now, if ever I protested about this, which I did daily, my mother used to silence me with a theory that I have no doubt at all her mother used to shut her up with. And she used to say, there is as much nourishment in a banana as there is in a pound of steak. I was brought up believing that. I don't know from what half-crazed scientist her family had picked this theory up from, but as a belief, it was as unassailable as her other one, that if you stood with your back to the fire, it melted the marrow in your backbone. Every term, after the first 4 days of term, there I'd be going round the playground and begging the chip shop set. I'd say, please, you want to swap 2 banana sandwiches for 1 chip? I'll throw in my bicycle. But of course, what growing boy in his right mind would make a swap like that? Isn't that a funny phrase, really? A growing boy. As though there's any other kind. So that was my school days. Complete and entire, as far as my memory is concerned. Banana sandwiches. So you can imagine that up to this day, I need hardly tell you, I have never touched another banana. And even now, today, I can't even look at a banana without the same resentful question swimming up into my consciousness. Was this the lunch that faced 1,000 chips?
Ladies and gentlemen, by your vote, a most extraordinary result has occurred, which only happens about once a century, and that is that Frank Muir and Denis Norden tie with their stories, and the whole contest ends in a draw.
Taking part in My Word were Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden and Frank Muir. The chairman was Jack Longland. The questions were compiled by Peter Moore and the programme was produced by Tony Shrine. My Word. Game devised by Tony Shrine and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words, with Jack Longland in the chair.
We go straight into the first round, which is about some artistic in-words that are bandied about in artistic or showbiz circles. For 2 marks, I want to know the meaning of the following words, and we begin with Denis Norden. Denis, your word is camp.
Well, whatever your definition is, Jack, it's going to be quarrelled with.
Yes.
If you remember, Susan Sontag wrote practically a book-length article on the meaning of camp. I think she called it a tender way of viewing the naive, which I disagree with. It's a sort of malicious archness, or it's a sort of preoccupation with trivia. Everybody's got different meanings. There's high camp and low camp. I'd say my idea of camp is a 50-year-old man wearing one of those smile medallions.
I get splendid. 2 marks at once. Now, Dilys Powell, your turn. Ethos. E-T-H-O-S.
E-T-H-O-S. Comes from the Greek.
Yeah.
Ought to mean the kind of spirit of something.
Mm-hmm.
Oughtn't it?
Yes.
Do we have to go farther than that?
Well, take it a little up into more modern times.
Well, the spirit of literature, of feeling, of mood.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
That's enough.
Good enough, yep. It's the characteristics, the habitual characteristics. It could be of a race, a culture, it can even be of an individual, or the assumptions of a group, and it's something which also conditions general behavior. 2 marks, ethos. Frank Muir, kitsch, K-I-T-S-C-H.
It's a recent word, German, isn't it?
It's in the 1920s, I think, if I remember, and 30s.
It's a word to do with taste.
Yes.
And it's interesting in that people who label things kitsch at least come out and make a stand on taste, which people usually don't like to do because you're standing on shifting sands. But kitsch is applied, amongst other things, to bad art, also to sort of misplaced art, to a statuette of the Venus de Medici with a clock in her tummy.
I think that's the best definition I've ever heard of kitsch. Something which is pretentious, inferior, in bad taste, showy, and so on. 2 marks, German word. And Scott James, avant-garde.
Well, I think I'd be fairly safe in saying this word is French.
Yes.
It simply means in advance.
Yes.
And it's sometimes used in a derogatory sense and sometimes not. Some people wish to be avant-garde and are always sort of one beat ahead of the fashion. And I think some people naturally lead fashion and are avant-garde. But it's really used in to cover a great range of tastes. I mean, you can be avant-garde in your fashion in architecture, something as grand as that. Or in I think the first person who suddenly brought ravioli to London was avant-garde in a small way.
I think that's splendid. 2 marks at once. Anne's distinction is an important one. It can be in the genuine vanguard, or it can be a bit bogus instead.
The engine driver could be called avant-garde.
When in fact the word in French means the vanguard, the bit in front of the army which probes into the country to see if there are enemies around. Before we go on to the next round, here are the quotations for the last round, and for Denis Norden, this is it. Till the sands of the deserts grow cold, and Frank Muir's quotation is, and so to bed. Well, now we have round 2, which is alleged national characteristics. Fairly sweeping generalizations that have been made about certain nations. 2 marks again, if you can tell me which nation is being referred to. Denis Norden, it is a country of 55 million actors, the worst of whom are on the stage.
Whatever happens, we're going to offend a whole population. It's 55 million. Do you think that's numerically correct?
Not now, I don't think, but it was at the time it was said, I suppose.
Because it was
said at the end of the last century.
First thought was Ireland.
Too big.
Population doesn't work, does it?
No. So they're theatrical.
Yes.
Mediterranean.
Yes.
France.
Italy.
Yes. Remember the author?
No, I don't know the author.
I didn't ask you that, so I don't deduct any marks, but it was said by Oscar Wilde about Italy. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, woman governs it because it is a land of boys who refuse to grow up.
Well, it's not Italy, because we've had Italy.
Certainly it's not Italy, no.
Surely it must be Sark.
No, the poor dame is dead, and she has a great nephew who is the seigneur.
Ruled by women, sounds like the Amazons.
A bit farther north.
Same old continent.
America. North America. United
North
States.
America, said my learned.
Which bit?
Well, the bit referred to. Matriarchal
the United
society.
States.
That's what I wanted. A bit of pushing and shoving there. I think I'll give you 1.5. The United States, according to the Spanish author and philosopher Salvador de Madariaga. Well, now, Frank Muir, they instinctively admire any man who has no talent and is modest about it.
Must be the English.
Yes? Absolutely.
Because nobody else ever to lose well is instilled in one very early age.
Well, as Churchill said of Attlee, we have much to be modest about, perhaps. I think that's the catch-all 2 mark. Have a shot if you like at the author.
No.
Dramatic critic.
Don't like at all. Timon.
No. James Agate. But anyways, you've got the English, and it is about the English, and 2 marks. And Scott James, A press campaign of 4 months will convince them of the rightness of any idiocy you like to suggest.
That's very extraordinary. I should think it's the Greeks. Always like newspapers. I can't think who's particularly susceptible to the press. Germany?
Yes.
Oh.
2 marks. I won't ask of the author because it's a very difficult name. It's Alfred von Kiederlein, a Wächter, who apparently said this about his own country. 2 marks.
Jack's having a rotten week, isn't he? With Spanish and German. It's very well managed.
Very, very difficult. Well, now we go on to a round of differences. For 2 marks, what's the precise difference in meaning between the following words? Denis Norden, derisive and derisory.
Well, that's kind of active and passive,
Yep.
isn't it? Derisory is generally used today, but you rarely hear it used otherwise than in a response to an offered wage increase.
Yes, yep.
In other words, it arouses scoffing,
Yes.
derisory, whereas derisive is when you wish to arouse scoffing, or you are scoffing yourself at the wage increase.
Yes, I think that's it. They do occasionally get overlap and mean each other, as it were, but that's not fair.
No.
Derisive means conveying derision of a mocking or scoffing kind, and as Dennis quite rightly said, derisory means something that invites derision, which is ridiculous or deserves mockery. 2 marks it is. Dilys Powell, illegible and unreadable.
Well, frankly, they're both the same.
Yeah?
They can mean the same, but
Yes.
I think if I asked at the beginning for a precise difference, and there is a precise difference, huh?
Unreadable can mean that the book is so boring that you cannot get past the first page.
Fine.
If it's illegible, you can't decipher the letters.
That's just exactly what I want. 2 marks straight away. Frank Muir, meticulous and pernickety.
Is this etymological?
No, I don't think so. No, in the sense of refinements of meaning.
In usage? Well, meticulous I use as somebody who doesn't want to go wrong.
Yes.
So he doesn't take any shortcut, or she. It doesn't take any shortcuts.
The person doesn't.
Yes, the person, and just ploughs on slowly and steadily at great length in order to get the thing right.
Yes.
And to be meticulous is in many ways a virtue.
Yes.
And pernickety has always seemed to me to carry the thing over into a kind of phobia. A pernickety person is somebody who is over meticulous.
Yes, that'll do. Yeah, and I think that's absolutely as good as it gets.
It's roughly, I am meticulous, you are pernickety.
That's right. Just to recap, meticulous has an overtone of being timidly over-careful about tiny details, but can be, according to what your job is, it can be absolutely essential. If you're a textual scholar, for instance, you have to be. Pernickety, as Frank says, is being a bit finical, so scrupulous that you're aggressively scrupulous. Perhaps it's not an entire accident. I should get into trouble about this, but pernickety is a Scots word. 2 marks.
You're in trouble.
And now, Anne Scott James, a delusion and an illusion.
Well, a delusion really implies that there is something mentally wrong with you, doesn't it?
With the person?
Yes,
Yes.
the person who is, it is a subjective thing. A delusion is a mistake in the mind.
Yes.
An illusion is outside the person's mind, I think. It's the thing, the imaginary or insubstantial thing which appears to a person. Will this do?
I think that's good enough, yes. I think that's 2. Delusion, a belief which is, though it's false, it is accepted by your mind as the truth, and it is normally a symptom of illness or even madness. Illusion is an impression that, though it is also false, you take on as being possible, because that's what your senses or imagination say to you. And of course the most obvious example of illusion is a conjurer's trick. 2 marks, I think. Well, now a round of surnames. For 2 marks, why do you suppose or deduce that the first bearers or wearers of the following surnames came to be so called? Denis Norden, Baynes, B-A-Y-N-E-S.
Bain. Is it anything to do with bain?
Yes.
The French.
Yes.
Well, he was a very early swimming bath attendant.
An attendant at public baths, and originally in France. Bain and Baynes being the same. And it comes from, there's a Middle English word, the same thing, Bain. Dilys Powell, Phillips.
Phillips. It was somebody who kept on giving a fillip to this and that.
No, this is Greek and you get it at one.
Oh, he was named after Philip of Macedonia, or Philippi, or meet you at Philippi.
But why did you have that name to start with? Because it's...
You must have been born there.
No. You weren't fond of hippopotamuses, but if you use the same route, it might take you there. Fond of...
Not at hippopotamus.
Like about 1.5 million little girls in this country are.
Horses?
Yes. Phillips means fond of horses. I can't give more than one, I think, because there's a bit of sort of shoving around there. Frank Muir.
Examine it in detail.
Frobisher.
Frobisher was one who was wont to frobish.
Yes.
Choir boys. who would throw things at the bishop. Am I wrong?
Well, if you think of the little boy who says, "Can I polish your car, sir?" And you hadn't got cars in those days, but you had something else, rather more personalised.
He was a chariot repairman.
He polished your best.
From here to there.
He polished your best suit for you.
Armour, perhaps.
That's right.
He was an armour polisher.
Yes, he was. Frobisher is the same as furbisher.
We didn't say that. Furbishing is what antiquely...
That's right.
To old coal.
Well, he was the dog's body. He was the armourer's assistant, who after the armourer had made your armour or repaired it after a war, this was a little boy who brightened your armour by rubbing it and polishing it and furbishing it. 1.5.
You can't in fact refurbish, can you?
Well, that's after the Second War.
Otherwise you'd re-repair. Otherwise you'd re-repair.
That's right. Anne Scott James, Wagstaff.
I should think he was somebody rather pompous, like a beadle or something of that kind.
Got it in one. He was a beadle. He had this staff like Mr. Bumble in Dickens. Quite right, 2 more. We come to the last round now, and Frank and Dennis's quotations, and the marks will be awarded on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. And Dennis, your quotation is, "Till the sands of the deserts grow cold," which I believe is a Victorian parlour ballad.
Do you want to hear something really chilling? Somebody told me about a distinguished thinker who came up with the most profound statement ever devised by man, and he had to discard it. It wouldn't fit on a T-shirt. Now, I mention that because in the same way as the 1950s became known as the aspirin age, and the 60s was the age of anxiety, so I believe the 1970s will go down in history as the T-shirt decade. Everyone under the age of 45 has become a sort of human hoarding. Kind of ambulant billboard. If you gaze around at all those emblazoned singlets that you see on the streets now, you'll find that they reflect every icon of contemporary society. Not only do they exhibit full-colour portraits of all today's culture heroes like Marcel Proust or Solzhenitsyn or Laurel and Hardy. They also bear slogans which embody every modern preoccupation. You see, it's only because of them that our My Word programme isn't being seen on television. You see, what happened was that one of the television networks made us this very good offer to screen the series exactly as it's done on radio, except for one thing. This last round, what the producer said was that television viewers were not, and I quote his phrase here, verbally oriented. What he claimed was, you see, was that the television audience wouldn't be able to retain in their minds the words of the quotations round which we have to construct these stories. So what he suggested should happen was this. When Frank and I came to tell our stories, Anne and Dilys should both wear T-shirts. And on their respective T-shirts would be the lines that Frank and I were working on. Well, of course, it is unthinkable. I mean, take the one that Frank's got this week. Now, can you imagine? Dilys Powell, our gentle, softly spoken Dilys, can you really imagine her sitting there wearing a white cotton vest that reads, "And so to bed"? And as for Anne, the tall, invincibly elegant Miss Scott James, the very thought of putting her in a T-shirt, it would be like hanging bunting on the dome of St. Paul. And when you recall some of the quotations that I've been given in the past, well, honestly, I mean, do we really want to see Anne Scott James draping her upper half in something that says, "These are a few of my favourite things"? So that's why you won't be seeing a television version of My Word. We will not countenance it, we told the producer. We would not contemplate it until we see some definite evidence that the fad for this offending modern garment is beginning to die out. Not, we said, unconsciously paraphrasing a ballad that our fathers used to sing, till there's signs that the T-shirt's no cult.
I can hardly recover from the mental pictures that story conjures up, and we'll go on quickly to Frank Muir, and if you remembered his quotation, "And so to bed," which comes more than once in Samuel Pepys's diary.
But does it? That's the point. Does it? Is that what he wrote? I don't believe it is. I think it's a corrupted version. As you know, Samuel Pepys wrote in cipher. He wrote in a kind of self-invented shorthand, which wasn't deciphered till 1825. Now, modern scientific investigations available to me have revealed that quite discrepancies in this translated text. Now, my method of deciphering Pepys's manuscript, which one can obtain in facsimile, is to get a mirror and prop it against the wall and stand on my head, holding the page upside down opposite the mirror. The occasion this famous saying was written in the diary happened when King Charles II wanted to go down to Greenwich with the Duchess of Portsmouth, who was his favourite mistress at the time. She was called the Duchess of Portsmouth because physically she quite closely resembled a naval dockyard. Charles wanted to take her down to Greenwich for a whitebait supper in the royal yacht. Now, the Lord Sandwich, who was Pepys's patron, had 2 sons, and they went to this dull old Pepys and said, look, when the king is going on the royal yacht with the Duchess of Portsmouth, why don't we have a show on board the yacht? Why don't we get a troupe of actresses in and give the king and the Duchess of Portsmouth a little sort of camp entertainment on board the yacht? Pepys was very worried about this. He thought the only way we could justify the expense was to make it a naval entry. So he called them the England's Naval Squadron of Actresses, ENSA. It might well be the origin of ENSA. So this ENSA troupe was put together by these 2 lads. There was Mull Davis and Nell Gwynn and Doll Ripknickers and Peg-leg Mrs. Coleman. And costumes were arranged for them. They were going to dance a pavan. When the girls were dressed, Pepys suddenly saw that their shoulders were not very attractive. You see, there was no running water in houses in those days, and most people in the country and town washed in the spring. Once a year is something, but these girls had never seen soap and water in their life, and their shoulders were not attractive. So Pepys had a thought, and he shouted down to the lower deck, "Bosun, grind up some corn into a white powder and dust their naked shoulders so as to render them white." And the bosun said, "Do what?" "Sir?" And he shouted down, "Dust them with corn powder." Now, whether the bosun was a gunner, whether it's the fact that gunners are usually half deaf in those days, but somehow he seemed to have misread the word corn powder. Because when the girls danced on to dance their pavan, they weren't dusted with white, but they were covered with a kind of gritty grey powder. Could it have been gunpowder? Anyway, the dance worked quite well until the end of the dance, when the girls they made up 4 corners and they backed rapidly and crashed together for the end. Whereupon there was a very sharp explosion and most of the tops of their dresses were blown off, rendering them naked from fur below to way above. And they stood there while the officer of the watch rang 8 bells. But it was a success, and that night, as he sat in his chambers filling in his diary, in his cipher, he wrote of the success of the day, but he finished the entry with just this little proviso, which has often been misinterpreted since, but which I interpreted upside down with a mirror. What he actually wrote was, "Ensa too bad."
Well, as the one-time librarian of the Pepys Library, I'm able to say that is the most terrible libel on Samuel Pepys. But by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Muir does win the contest of the 2 stories with that story. On the other hand, as far as the whole of this edition of My Word is concerned, Anne Scott James and Denis Norden win the entire contest.
Taking part in My Word were Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden and Frank Muir. The chairman was Jack Longland. The questions were compiled by Peter Moore and the programme was produced by Tony Schrein. My Word. devised by Denis Norden and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Anne Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words, with Jack Longland in the chair.
And we go straight into the first round, which is about words ending in phobia, which indicates a strong and sometimes morbid aversion. So for 1 mark, what would you dislike or dread or have a morbid fear of if you suffered from the following? And I'm bound to warn the team that some of these are what they call nonce words, coined for use on one particular occasion or coined at the moment. Begin with Frank Muir. Your first word is pogonophobia. P-O-G-O-N-O-P-H-O-B-I-A. Pogonophobia, sorry.
Nice to begin with a simple one.
Yeah.
It's the fear of being forbidden to ride your pogo stick.
Nice thought.
But that's it. Don't pause, Jack, and wait for further.
It might induce you to shave in the morning.
Shave. Come on, Daryl. Greek. Is it Greek? Pogo.
Pogo.
Pogo, no. No, pogo.
Fear of beards, obviously.
That's right.
Fear of beards.
That's right. A mark.
Who's going to fear beards?
It's a morbid. I said sometimes morbid.
Barbers.
Anne Scott James, yours is musophobia. M-U-S-O and then phobia. And
that's afraid of being poisoned by shellfish, obviously.
that would musculophobia.
Well, you have a point. Well, what about one of those heavy hints about like shaving?
Well, it's a bit rodent.
Oh, of course it is. It's when you jump on a chair and pull up your skirts above your knees and scream.
Well, we might do it for many reasons.
Let me finish. When a mouse emerges.
That's right.
Fear of mice.
It's a fear of mice. Absolutely right. One more. Denis Norden, yours is clinophobia. C-L-I-N-O and then phobia. Clinophobia.
Clino gives me no help at all. It's not like enclosed. Not like being afraid of being on the side of a hill.
Yes, it's roughly that.
That's what it is.
It's indoors there.
On the side.
Wouldn't happen in a bungalow.
Well, if you swept all the dust under the carpet for long enough, you would have an indoor hill.
And do you like it or not?
No, I wouldn't like it at all. I'd be afraid to walk up it.
Fear of going upstairs. How about
That's right. Fear of going upstairs or going up a slope. That's why I say it's indoors, which is more likely to be upstairs than just up a slope, even in Dennis's house. Oh, well, Dilys Powell, your turn. Triskaidekaphobia.
Triskaideka.
Useful and everyday words.
Yes.
You may take notes.
Well, I live at the house which is numbered in the street 14.
Yes, you've only just escaped Triskaidekaphobia.
And I'm not sure if the next one is called 13 or not. I think it may not be. But it's afraid of... I mean, in modern Greek, it comes Dekatrice. But in your classical Greek, Jack, which is so much grander than mine, it's 13. So it's fear of 13.
Fear of 13 is what makes the hotel proprietor... He has 3 bedrooms in a row. One is called 12, one is called 12A, and the next is called 14, because he's frightened about 13, or his guests maybe.
Or a mother of 12 children who goes off her husband.
You can't have 12 and a half, at least I don't think you can. Your turn again, Frank. Gymnophobia. G-Y-M-N-O. Gymnophobia.
Ooh. It's roughly like the... my constant companion says that it's fear of nakedness.
That's right. That's right.
I had that when I was a very small boy.
Not much of that about the West End cinema.
Well, I had that when I was a very, very small boy at school, and oddly enough, ironically enough, it was gym. I hated gym. Yeah. Because I had to sort of slip my trousers down to put my gym. I was not worried about
I
it.
used to have a morbid fear of showing my vest.
Is there a vestophobia? Singlitomania.
Anne Scott James's turn. Allophobia. A-U-L-O. Allophobia.
Fear of everything.
Something to do with winds, I should think.
Yes. Something you do, yes, which you need a wind or a kind of wind in order to make it work.
Oh, fear of using a vacuum cleaner.
Well, take it the other way round and don't suck in but blow out.
No, blow out, yes. A fear of bursting. Blowing too hard when you talk.
Well, what are you blowing?
A wind instrument.
Yes, that's what I wanted. It's a fear of flutes or wind instruments. 1 mark.
Now, I think that's the foolish thing in that.
How can you fear a flute? What do you suspect is going to happen to you? What's somebody going to do to you with a flute?
They play all night.
I think it makes a difference if it's well played or bad.
Yes, that makes a difference too.
You have a morbid fear of it.
Denis Norden, yours is simpler. Parthenophobia. Parthenophobia, sorry.
Parthenophobia. It's either having a fear of having the Parthenon fall on you, or you're standing having your photograph taken.
It's mostly fallen already.
Is it like parthenogenesis?
Yes, that sort of thing. Yes. Yes, that's the right line.
What's parthenogenesis? It means fear of virgins.
Yes, that's right.
Sounds more respectable.
That's all right.
Is this your trouble?
I don't know that it applies to Denis. It's fear of young girls. 1 mark. Back to Dilys Powell. Yours is phobophobia. P-H-O-B-O. Phobophobia.
A fear of being afraid.
That's right. Fear of fear. 1 mark. Well, before we get on to the next round, here are the quotations for the last round for Frank and Denis. And Frank, yours is, "We lost our little Hannah in a very painful manner." And yours, Denis, is, "Every prospect pleases and only man is vile." Well, now we have a round of assorted emergencies of a very odd kind. 2 marks. How would you, or rather should you, rise to the occasion and cope with these emergencies one after the other? Frank Muir, you're called upon to stop a dogfight between, say, a fox terrier and an Afghan hound.
Well, I suppose, as we're in the realms of literature, Bill Sykes would kick it in the ribs.
Yes.
And Elizabeth Barrett Browning would hurl a book of sonnets in Portuguese. I think that the best way of stopping this kind
You
of...
assume, Frank, that they're already entangled.
Yeah. Whether they're entangled in an amatory sense or in an aggressive sense, a bucket of water is the specific remedy, but one never seems to have a bucket. From experience, I would say that the thing to do is to rip off your coat. Yes. And put it rapidly around the animals' heads, because whereupon they were disentangled, because they don't like fighting and being in the dark.
I think that would work, and I think you'll get your marks. I have a different recipe offered to me by the compiler, who says take the smaller dog, which is obviously a good deal safer, fox terrier, for instance, by the tail, and lift it clear of the ground simultaneously, shouting "Stop, let go," into the ear of the larger dog. And then Frank's friend, who is a helpful bystander, has got a bucket, and he assists by sprinkling water off. If he hasn't got water, he has a packet of pepper in his pocket, and he sprinkles pepper over both dogs' heads.
I think we should lift the compiler by the tail.
But anyway, yours is obviously an equally effective method, and you'll get your 2 marks. And Scott James, a child in your charge has an attack of croup. That is breathlessness, noisy breathing, and a high-pitched continuous cough. What do you do?
Well, just expose it, I think, on the hip. Finish it off. Oh, I know what you do.
Yes.
You ring for the doctor.
Yes.
Just put it in its cot.
And until the doctor arrives, while it's coughing itself, like nobody's business.
Got any sort of experience of this?
No, I never. I just hit them, whatever it is. Most things, I don't. About croup.
Have you got a basin of hot steaming water?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, let it sort of inhale loosely, roughly.
I think 1.5.
I think, in fact, I would give it a teaspoonful of honey.
Yes, that'd be a very good one.
I think this would be quite seriously, as the successful mother of 2 children reared to maturity, this would probably be what would happen.
Well,
don't you fly them in an open cockpit aeroplane?
That's
10,000 feet. That's not a handy thing like a bucket of water.
No, your first part, certainly send for the doctor at once. It's usually 1 a.m.
Let it inhale steam, you say.
That's right. You shut windows and things, and you hold the child's head over a basin of steaming hot water.
With a towel over it.
Yes, towel over it and Mum. Otherwise it gets rather frightened. So you both have to inhale balsam in a steaming hot water basin. This is the traditional remedy.
And Jack, if you've got two dogs with croup who are fighting, you put the towel over both of them.
You need to. Anyway, 1.5, I think. Dennis Norden, the front of your best evening silk shirt is marred by a firmly stuck blob of chewing gum. Now, I may be a snob, but I don't know how you can conceivably get yourself into that position. But if you will imagine yourself into it, how do you get away from it?
Well, there are two other assumptions in that question. One is that I have a silk evening dress shirt, which I haven't. And the other one is I have a best evening dress silk shirt, which must imply I have 3 of them, because it would be the better one if there's only 2. Now, if I could afford to have 3 silk evening shirts, if I had a blob of chewing gum on it, I would insert in that blob of chewing gum an small, exquisitely cut diamond. I would then get 2 more bits of chewing gum and put them further down. I would then have more diamonds in those. I would then have a matching set of diamonds set in chewing gum. And if you've got diamonds and a silk shirt, everybody's going to say he's terribly rich and rather eccentric. But nobody will.
This isn't what I've got, but I can't fault it. I'm going to give you 2 marks straight away. But what I've got is remove the shirt and place it in the fridge, or better still, in the deep freeze. After about 30 minutes, the blob of gum will have frozen solid and can be lifted off.
Ketchup.
Yes, but it spoils the flavour.
Anyway, to get you 2 marks. Now, Dilys Powell, this is very unfortunate indeed. Your dancing partner is painfully immobilized by violent cramp down one leg. What do you do?
I leave him.
It's supposed to be a cure, not a desertion.
Well,
take his shoe off and bend his big toe back.
That's right. Absolutely right.
Really?
Yes, Frank, he's got it right.
I do it in the middle of the night.
Yes, you remove the shoe from the affected leg, you stand the sufferer on it, and you, as Frank quite rightly says, you pull the toes sharply upwards. If the toes come away in your hand, you ask whether the discotheque has a comprehensive insurance policy. Otherwise, you're on Mount Everest. So, but you get your 2 marks. Well, now, in this round, for 2 marks, what would you suppose or expect an Australian to mean by the following phrases? Frank Muir, a duck's dinner.
Charlie Drake. I presume this is one of those funnies, isn't it? Like
I think so, yes.
Duke Humphrey, dining with Duke Humphrey.
That's right.
Yeah.
Very like that.
A duck's dinner was presumably water.
Absolutely right. A drink of water and nothing to eat. 2 marks. Anne Scott. Anne Scott James. To bat the breeze. B-R-E-E-Z-E. To bat the breeze.
Well, the American shoot the breeze.
Yes.
Means just to stop and have a chat and
yes.
It's sort of desultory sort of chat.
Waffle away.
That's it. Waffle away. Chattering or nattering, gossiping. 2 marks. Denis Norden, this is up your street. To go see Mrs. Murray.
I can only assume it means something vulgar.
Yes, that's right.
Does it mean the same as to point Percy at the porcelain?
Yes. All right, we'll take that. To visit the loo or lavatory. Dilys Powell, yours is a bit different. Yours is an amen snorter.
Amen snorter?
Mm.
Oh, some rather bogus religious character.
Needn't necessarily be bogus.
A religious character without the bogus. Thought a preacher? Learned partner says preacher.
Preacher?
Yes, that'll do.
Preacher.
A clergyman, preacher, or somebody with pronounced evangelistic tendencies, 2 marks. Now we come to the last round. And Frank and Denis's quotations, and the marks will be awarded on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. Frank, yours was, "We lost our little Hannah in a very painful manner." So I believe it's from a chap called Max Adler, an American humorist, a sort of set of cautionary tales.
I've been terribly kind to the listening hundreds in never mentioning my book. But I must tell you something about it tonight. I have to explain why one of the quotations isn't accredited sufficiently fully. You see, it's a difficult book to describe. It's a kind of retelling of social history in which quotations are inserted rather like exotic fruit in a failed Yorkshire pudding. And all the quotations are against. And the important thing to me was to get the background of these quotations, not just the quotations. They have things like, somebody said, vegetarianism is harmless enough, or although it is apt to fill a man with wind and self-righteousness, which is nice, but it's also nice to know that it was said by Sir William Hutchison, who was president of the Royal College of Physicians at the time. Sir Walter Scott tried his hand occasionally at sort of patriotic poetry. He was very patriotic, but he wasn't a very good patriotic poet. But after Waterloo, he wrote a very long poem about the plains of Waterloo, really to help relieve the suffering of the widows. Very worthwhile, but it's a terrible poem. And somebody wrote about this poem, "The corpse of many a hero slain pressed Waterloo's ensanguined plain, but none by salvo or by shot fell half as flat as Walter Scott." Which is a very nice little comment. But to find out who said it, it was actually written by a chap called, he was the first Baron Erskine, and he was Lord Chancellor, and he was a self-made man, a solicitor. And at the age of 15, he'd been struck by lightning. Well, that's what I mean about these little sort of background pieces of information. It sort of explains everything, the fact that he'd been struck by lightning at the age of 15. And these bits of information, which are called Arna, you know, like Shakespeareana or whatever, are the things that I was searching for this book. And I was searching for them mostly at a place called the London Library, which is a vast building in St. James's Square, and was founded to have books open on the shelves that people who were researchers could go in and actually pull the books down. One morning there was a lady novelist bounded round a corner and saw Lord David Cecil lying prone on the floor, and she suspected the worst, and she sprang forward, being a resourceful woman, and gave him artificial respiration. And she got the knees and into the back of the lungs and pressed forward. 1, 2, 3, and back. 1, 2, 3. And after about 3 minutes, "I don't know what you're doing, madam, but I'm looking on the bottom shelf for Locke's essay on human understanding." It was in these circumstances that I was searching for my Arna. I wanted some information about cottage industries, about home weaving, and I got out Silas Marner. And I was there with a helper, the vicar's wife, who held Silas Marner for me. And I also wanted, and this is the important thing, to back up a line which Denis had given me. And it was the first quotation I had to start my book. And Denis had given it to me from his commonplace book, and he will remember it. It's from Chekhov, who said, "I do not understand the ballet, except that I do know that during the intervals, the dancers stink like horses." And I wanted to find out about this. So I wanted Chekhoviana. And I got an old envelope, and I was going through the books, and I found out things about Chekhov. You know, he got married to an actress, and he had a puppy called Muir. Apparently there's a firm in Moscow, a Scottish firm called Muir, and he named his puppy after it. And I wrote up my Anna and shoved it in the Silas Marner. And I was lying like Lord David Cecil, really trying to find out from his letters when he actually said this. And a poet galloped past and kicked the volume of Silas Marner, and it flew out of my hands, hit the wall, and dropped down behind the rack of books. Now, I was on the top floor, and I had this hideous sight of seeing Silas Marner drop down 4 flights and strike a reverend gentleman who was bent over the books in the back of the neck. Now, Silas Marner is quite a small book, even though full of my bits. But it obviously was very hurtful to the reverend gentleman who swore in that sort of modified way one swears in libraries in Latin. So I had to flee the premises. So this is really to explain that when you see the book, the quotation of I do not understand the ballet is just got Anton Chekhov and his dates. I can't give you any of the background, the Anna information. I had it, but the vicar's wife and I, we lost our little Anna in a very painful Marna.
That'll keep people away from the London Library, and we go on to Denis, and if you remember, his quotation was, "Every prospect pleases, and only man is vile," which is the hymn, I think, by Bishop Reginald Heber.
Well, despite their usefulness in getting globs of chewing gum off silk dress shirts, let me tell you some of the reasons why I'm one of the few people who are still unconverted to this present craze for living out of deep freezers, what you might call the second ice age. You see, quite apart from the fact that frozen food always looks so unattractive. I mean, have you ever seen a hamburger that's been in a freezer? It takes on the appearance of an ice hockey puck. But quite apart from that, when a small freezer is as packed to capacity as ours always is, what it becomes is a downright hazard. If you open the freezer door with anything less than the most extreme caution, do you know what happens? You find yourself limping for 3 days. It can wallop right on your foot. Do you realize that we have become the first generation who succeeded in making it scientifically possible for a pint of chicken soup to fracture your instep? On top of that, the other great abiding snag is that when you take something out of a freezer, there is no way of recognizing what it is. Do you remember in Gone with the Wind how Scarlett O'Hara said, "As God is my witness, I'll never go hungry again"? Well, when a deep freeze arrives in a woman's kitchen, that becomes, "As God is my witness, I'll never go short of veal stock again." Within 1 week of purchase, 85% of the interior cubic footage of our machine was taken up by those rotten oblong plastic containers, every one of which was bursting its lid with that gleaming sort of beige-coloured solid substance that simple veal stock becomes when it's subjected to the freezing process. What's more, every one of these containers, which are called frost packs, every one of these frost packs was unlabelled. Now, why I stress that last word, unlabelled, is because there's only one thing that I have ever wanted to have a deep freeze for. It was to ensure that I always had at hand an adequate supply of coffee ice cream. Now, to me, and I've knocked around the world a bit, to me there is nothing that mankind has created that matches the nobility of coffee ice cream. But when all your frost packs are unlabelled, and 85% of them are veal stock, well, can you imagine anything that can damage your taste buds more irreparably than to gear them up to expect coffee ice cream, then at the very first lick send down wet veal? Now, I do realise that my attitude to these domestic cold comfort farms may place me in a minority, so I can only hope that I've explained why, as far as coffee ice cream is concerned anyway, I seem to be in a position where, as the old hymn has it, every frost pack freezes and only mine is veal.
Well, that was a domestic tragedy. And by your vote, nevertheless, ladies and gentlemen, Denis Norden wins the story, but Dilys Powell and Frank Muir in the other team win the entire contest.
Taking part in My Word were Ann Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden and Frank Muir. The chairman was Jack Longland. The questions were compiled by Peter Moore and the programme was produced by Tony Schreyer. My Word. Panel game devised by Tony Schreyer and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Ann Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words, with Jack Longland in the chair.
And we go straight into the first round, which is about words, and this week about some newish adjectives which end in ick, I see. And for 2 marks, I want to know their meaning. We begin with Denis Norden, and yours, Denis, is anabolic, A-N-A-B-O-L-I-C, anabolic.
Not the singular diabolic, no.
No.
I only know this word in connection with a phrase about anabolic steroids.
That's right.
Which is what those kind of weightlifters and Mr. Universe people, you get muscles in your eyebrows. But what it does to steroids, or what either of the words mean, I really don't know.
Well, the building up of muscle is a good start, Dennis.
Anabolic must be something to do with throwing, mustn't it?
No, it means, it's a Greek word meaning a heaping up, and that's where the muscles get bigger. 1.5, Dennis. It's adjective by itself, anabolic, is that which produces or induces chemical changes in living organisms, particularly when it leads to the chemical upbuilding of complex substances. And as you say, weightlifters and shot putters sometimes cheat against their more honest competitors by taking these anabolic steroids. Dilys, yours is cryogenic, C-R-Y-O-G-E-N-I-C, cryogenic.
Well, when I was in Greece a long time ago, the seagulls always said, creo, creo, and we used to say it meant cold.
It does. Cold is a good start.
So it's something to do with cold, producing cold, or born in cold, or something with cold anyway. It's good enough, isn't it? Yes.
Yes. Any particular sort of branch of science?
Oh, well, the refrigerator.
He'll do. 2. Cryogenic is that which pertains to or is identifiable with low-temperature substances or the apparatus necessary to produce low temperatures, which is your fridge. And it comes, as you say, from a Greek word, kruos, meaning frost.
One of the smaller surprises of my life was to discover that bird's eye peas, the bird's eye isn't just a trade name, but it is named after the chap who who discovered deep freezing on one of those Antarctic expeditions, whose name was Clarence Birdseye. A round of applause would not be amiss.
Well, I
He was actually given the Nobel Peace Prize.
Well, I'd heard about Admiral Bird at the South Pole, but this Clarence escapes me. But thank you very much. A useful bit of information, Frank. And now it's your turn.
Oh, good.
And your word is bionic.
Bionic is... I know little about this because the chap used to live opposite us at Thorpe who was in bionics. And he was concerned with examining human tissue and structure in order to make computers speak.
Yes, that's about it.
I don't think he's quite got there yet, but he's still at it. And it seems to be an examination of the way animals work, the animal tissues and muscles and so forth, in order to adapt that to mechanical purposes.
Absolutely right, Frank. 2 marks. Bionics is study of methods of working of living creatures and the application of the principles that you've observed to the design of computers. It sounds to me absolutely dreadful. 2 marks indeed. And Scott James, your word is hydroponic.
When you put your bulbs over their roots to grow into a little pot of water, you're growing them by hydroponics.
Yeah, and it's supposed to have a great future, is that right?
Well, I don't know. It depends on the water supply, I think. It depends on whether soil or water is more readily available in the future.
That's right. 2 marks at once. That which pertains to the cultivation of plants without soil and in water, and you then fill up the water with chemicals to make the plants grow. Greek words again, meaning water toil, and it must be very like that.
Actually, in all the science fiction of the 30s, in all the spaceships, they got their vegetables hydroponically.
Yes, they did, yes.
So they didn't... it's not that new.
No. Well, before we get on to the next round, here are the quotations for the last round, which I'm giving to Frank Muir and Denis Norden. And, Denis, yours is A Little Touch of Harry in the Night. And yours, Frank, None But the Brave Deserves the Fair. Bringing on round 2, which is a round of contrived commentary. For 2 marks, I want a comment in a single sentence on a given subject. And your comment must include, in any order, 3 words that I also give you. Back to Denis Norden again. Denis, your subject is an organ recital, and your 3 given words are diapason, footwork, and inconsolable.
Diapason,
Footwork,
and...
inconsolable.
Can I put in for fringe benefits on this? John Bull, the celebrated John Bull, who is reputed to have composed the melody of our national anthem, one day sat on the keyboard console in order to play a diapason on the foot pedals purely by footwork, thus causing a passer-by to say, "Inconsole a bull."
Well, I don't think you could have got those 3 words into shorter space than Denis used there. 2 marks at once. Denis Powell, your subject is a swan, and your 3 given words are Pavlova, monogamous, and cob, C-O-B.
Perhaps it should be a kind of look about you nature notebook study.
Yes?
Yes. Addressed to the class, perhaps. Perhaps I should warn you that a swan is a passionate bird. And I should, no, just a comma, no full stop. And I should go on to say that unlike Pavlova, whose intimate acquaintance with swans was limited to those who are dying, a leader was indecently assaulted by Jupiter in the form of a cob, far from monogamous.
The famous picture of that is called Swan Upping.
Well, after that rapid tour through mythology and ballet, 2 marks again, we pass on to Anne Scott James. And yours, Anne, is a Catherine wheel. And your given words are centrifugal, scintilla, scintilla, and martyrdom.
Well, I don't think there's a scintilla of hard evidence to prove that the legend of St. Catherine's martyrdom is accurate and actually happened. But on the other hand, I think it's psychologically quite possible, because I think St. Catherine was somebody very like me, somebody who had absolutely no aptitude at all for mechanics or technology. Because the fact is, as we all know, that when she touched the wheel, it broke.
Yes.
Now I've got to get in centrifugal.
You've got to get in another conjunction.
Therefore, as you were so helpfully saying, Dennis, whenever I see St. Catherine's wheel going round and round, sending off those centrifugal sparks on November the 5th, I think there is a woman who, if she lived today, like me, would be an excellent car driver, but wouldn't have a clue what went on under the bonnet.
2 marks, sad story. Frank Muir, well, your subject is a hammock. And your 3 given words are dusk, notwithstanding, and full frontal.
Haven't got to be in the same order, have they?
Nope.
I can't write that fast. Notwithstanding, full frontal. What does that mean?
We don't go to the cinema now.
A hammock, Jack, sir, is a peculiarly naval device, a kind of bed-like net in which a sailor can retire at dusk, rest his ankles on the hot pipe above the hammock, thus enabling him to see the better the full frontal.
100.
Among the items
Stuck to the bulkhead wall, full frontal, only to find that he has to present himself at sick parade the following morning with sore and painful feet acquired notwithstanding.
Splendid picture of life in the Navy, and 2 marks. Now we have a round, a quickie, I think, of etymological imports. For 2 marks, what's the literal translation of the following foreign words, which are now fairly much accepted into the English language? Denis Norden, no, nothing personal here, orangutan.
What does it literally mean?
Mean, that's right.
I don't know. Orang-utang. I'll wash you white. I don't know. I suppose it literally meant creature that goes along looking like a man and with a rather roseate rear.
Yes, without being anatomical, you've got half of it right.
Which half did I get right?
The man. Which half? Where does he live? Man. Where does he live?
I heard a very good definition the other day on that. Clever is believing half of what you read. Brilliant is knowing which half. I don't know what orangutan means.
Well, you've got the man. I'll give you 1. It means man of the woods. It's a Malay word, and they're found in Borneo, and I think were found in Sumatra. It's said that the Malays themselves don't use this phrase, orangutan, of this particular ape, but we do. 1 out of 2. Dilys Powell, A subpoena, S-U-B-P-O-E-N-A, subpoena, literally.
Subpoena, it means under penalty. It means.
That's right.
Under penalty.
And you use it for what?
You use it for being summoned to give evidence in a legal case which you aren't necessarily willing to take part in.
That's right. 2 marks, well described. Frank Muir.
The lawyer was lost in you.
Yes.
Frank Muir. Harakiri.
Well, what was the question?
What does it literally mean if you're a Japanese scholar?
It means a particularly nasty and painful way of doing away with yourself.
Yes.
Ripping yourself up with a knife.
Yes.
Your tummy. Harakiri is very old Japanese for goodbye acid indigestion.
Frank, it describes the act which you don't much like much more accurately than you've so far suggested.
Gut slice.
That'll do. 2 marks. It means belly cut. And as Frank says, it's ceremonious suicide. And Scott James, negligee, with 2 E's at the end. Negligee. Literal meaning.
Well, it means, I suppose, that you've neglected when your lover comes to see you. Only you are neglected, aren't you? No, I think it means you've neglected to put on proper clothing. In other words, you're all sort of prepared to throw off the little bit. the last little neglected portion of your clothing at the drop of a hat.
Yeah, what does the adjective actually refer to? Is it
the person, do you think, or the garment? I think it means rob negligee.
It refers to the person.
It means the person. Ah, then your lover's abandoned you. So instead of standing naked in the bedroom, you put your negligee on, bury your face in the pillow, and burst into tears.
Affecting scenes, aren't they?
Yeah. Any good?
Yes, I think it'll do.
Something loose. You slip into something loose.
That's what I wanted. Yes, we won't go any further into that. It means originally careless of one's appearance. In the 18th century, it was a woman's loose, decorative dressing gown of flimsy material, and therefore easy undress. And you can make of that what you like, 2 marks. And we come to the last round, and to Frank and Denis's quotations, and the marks will be awarded on the length of the applause of the audience here in the theatre. And Denis, your quotation, if you remember, is a little touch of Harry in the night, which comes from Shakespeare's Henry V.
Let me read you this chap's letter. The envelope's got an Amsterdam postmark, and inside it says, "Dear Mr. Norden, there is an international guide to proprietors of private menageries. It is entitled Who's Zoo, and on perusing it, I noticed with interest that you are now the owner of a collection of wild animals. I wonder if you would be interested in selling them, because having recently had the misfortune to plant all my tulip bulbs upside down, I now have 40 acres of wasteland that would make an excellent safari park. Yours sincerely, etc., etc." Well, talk about a godsend. You don't know how hard it is to get rid of a private zoo. Of course, I should never have accepted it in the first place. But you see, what happened was I'd sold my car to this bloke in Hertfordshire, and when I went down to pick up the cash from him, he said he was a bit strapped for ready money, so would I accept his private menagerie instead? Well, I suppose I should have been a bit suspicious, because the car was only a 1953 Wolsey, and all I asked for it was 25 quid. But, you know, I get these impulses, and the idea of owning my own private zoo, especially as I just bought a lightweight safari jacket. So I said, all right then, fine. And so he shoved the documents in my hand and scooted off. Well, just a 10-minute tour was enough to show me what I'd let myself in for. This wasn't a zoo. It was a rest centre for animals with psychiatric problems. Every creature in the place was suffering from some kind of personality defect. There was a mountain goat that was scared of heights, a hyena with melancholia, a gazelle that limped, and what could possibly have been the world's only vegetarian piranha fish. To say nothing of a praying mantis that had turned agnostic, and a sheep that was allergic to wool. Even the animal that they call the king of the jungle turned out to be bisexual. Really, the only lion I've ever heard roar with a lisp. Well, as you can imagine, over the next few months, it cost me a fortune, not just in animal psychiatrists, but in the plain ordinary vets as well. That hippopotamus, for instance, every other day he collapsed to the ground with some illness or other. Mind you, personally, I'd say they were all imaginary. I think he's what they call a hypochondriac. It's still no joke trying to treat an unwell hippo, even if he is malingering. That day, he had to have one of his teeth taken out. It was a nightmare. Not the actual extraction. That was fairly straightforward. It was the getting him to sit in the chair. So, as I say, you can imagine how glad I was to get this letter that I read you, offering to take the lot of them off my hands. And that's why this evening, as soon as it gets dark, all those animals are going to be crated up and sent off down the old Amsterdam Trail. Or as they put it in Henry V, a little Dutch safari in the night.
Does have a tough time, Denis, doesn't he? And we'll go on to Frank, and his quotation was, "None but the brave deserves the fair."
I want to talk to you tonight about taxicabs and taxi drivers, upon which I am a world authority, having been on a tour of the United States, South Africa, Australia and New Zealand. About 9/10 of your time is spent either in a taxi cab or trying to find one. And you soon come across the various vagaries which exist in the various countries. New Zealand was very little problem because they have virtually no taxi cabs. Because, well, they don't need to get anywhere, you know, they're there. Africa, where I found taxi drivers were taciturn and very cool. We had a weekend at Chobe Game Reserve, and we had a cab for the night we spent there, driven by a Matabele driver called Ivan. And Ivan was rather afraid of elephant. As I say now, having been to the Chobe Game Reserve. Elephants, I would have said beforehand. But Ivan was rather afraid of elephant. He disliked them under the, no doubt, advised thought that they also disliked him. And we were driving round the trail and suddenly came face to face with a great black bull elephant, and there was thrashing about in the trees beside him. So obviously he had a calf or a wife or something there, and didn't like being intruded on by a rather thinly armoured car with my wife and I and Ivan driving. And he drew up, slammed the brakes on. We stopped about 5 foot away from this beast, who lowered his ears forward and made trumpeting noises. And Ivan turned to me and very coolly said,
May I reverse, sir? I said, yes, you may. It's in America that you come up against the taxi problem, because American taxis are not like British taxis. British taxis, as you know, are designed so that a gentleman may sit upright on the back seat in a silk hat. And American taxi cabs are frequently yellow and always bent. And they have a bulletproof screen erected between the driver and the passenger, so that the driver won't be bopped on the head by a social misfit. Unhappily, the room taken up by this bulletproof screen is most of the room formerly occupied by the passengers. So anybody over the height of 3'6" has to draw himself up into a kind of fetal crouch. You can speak to it's a kind of gauze thing, but you can speak to him through a kind of square hole. And American taxi drivers are either totally silent, and you just gaze at the back of their necks, and they don't reply at all, or else they're extremely garrulous, and never stop talking at all. Hey, you're a stranger, ain't you? What are you, French? French. One said to me, hey, do you know Giraldo? And I said, well, yes, I did, yes. And this chap was a great... He said, I once drove Giraldo. He was a gentleman, Giraldo. He said, that was dance music in the 1940s. They don't write dance music like that anymore. He said, hey, fella, do you remember You Stepped Out of a Dream? And he was turning around and looking at me through this bulletproof gauze. We were careering all down 57th Street, harmonizing. Me and my knees, talking through this grid as though in some weird mobile confessional. I do think it's wrong that American, particularly New York cabbies, inflict on your journey the stories of the trouble they have with their wife, with their teeth, with their feet, and with their taxes. This is totally wrong. They should pay you to listen to all that rubbish, as though they would pay for a psychiatrist. I don't think you should pay them, and I'm totally in agreement with John Dryden. And I'm sure it was New York cabbies he had in mind and their conversation when he wrote, none but the brief deserve the fare.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, by your vote, Denis Norden wins the story, but the other team, Dilys, Powell and Frank Muir, win the entire contest.
Taking part in My Word were Ann Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden and Frank Muir. The chairman was Jack Longland. The questions were compiled by Peter Moore, and the programme was produced by Tony Shrine. My Word. Game devised by Tony Shrine and Edward J. Mason. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir challenge Ann Scott James and Denis Norden in a game about words, with Jack Longland in the chair.
We go straight into the first round, which is about words, and this week about various isms. And for 2 marks, I want to know what the meaning is of these isms. And Frank Muir begins, chauvinism, chauvinism, chauvinism.
There's no venism, like chauvinism. Chauvinism means a blinkered, irrational, overzealous patriotism.
Absolutely right, yes.
I think there was a citizen Chauvin, who thought that Napoleon and his wars were the best thing since French bread.
Absolutely. He was a veteran, Napoleon's, and he figures in a book by a chap called Conyard, which I think translated means the tricoloured cockade, and he was exactly as Frank Muir has described him. 2 marks. And Scott James, Micawberism.
Well, it means really extreme optimism. Mr. Micawber, very irrational optimism, brings me now a character in Dickens who was always in debt.
Yes.
But I always feel I'm just like Mrs. Micawber, really, because she was a very miserable, optimistic, a very unnecessarily optimistic wife, who's always leading her into trouble. This has rather been my husband. This has rather been my fate through life.
Well, I hasten to reassure our audiences all over the world that Anne Scott James doesn't look in the least like Mrs. Micawber. Very, very, very much better looking. So 2 marks. Denis Norden, yours is Momism. M-O-M hyphen, if you like it, I-S-M.
Well, I suppose the earliest example would be Oedipus.
Yes.
It's a kind of exaggerated respect for mother, which, although I think we tend to associate it with America, we would do well to remember that there is a certain popular mass-produced bread which rather plays on this feeling as well.
You mustn't mention it. Absolutely right. It does come from perhaps mawkish adoration of one's mum and probably passively accepting her domination over you. 2 marks. Denis Powell, hedonism.
Hedonism means the pursuit of something which is generally forbidden by political parties. Pleasure.
Dilys, I was afraid you were about to say armed rebellion. But you're dead right. It's that doctrine, I suppose it comes into the theory of ethics, in which pleasure is the highest good, you think, and the proper end of any action you may intend to do. 2 marks. Before we go on to the next round, here are the quotations for the last round of all. And Frank, yours is, hello, hello, who's your lady friend? And your... All right. And yours, Denis, genius is an infinite capacity for taking pains. And so to round 2, a round of origins and derivations, and again for 2 marks. How did the following words or phrases originate, or from what did they derive? Frank Muir, and please, it's not meant personally, a fig for you, sir.
It's a bit filthy, Jack.
Well, you can take it on less filthy than not side. It can be
Well,
done.
how can you when it's filthy?
Well,
It's an expression you insert the thumb between the 2 fingers.
That's right. Yeah.
In a gesture of derision or
That's right.
contempt
Yeah,
or something,
yeah.
and it's very continental, and therefore, by definition, filthy.
That's your Frank. It's absolutely right. Yes, in French it was called faire la figue, but as I think Carol Brahms said on one occasion, everything's all right if it's Shakespeare. And Shakespeare uses this in Othello, in King Henry IV, and the Merry Wives, a contemptuous gesture to somebody whom you don't think very much of. A fig for you, 2 marks. And Scott James, the origin of a question mark.
So all you're going to sort of tell me, put it to me.
The origin would be a question.
That's fair enough. But now the sign that we use...
Actually, the shape of it.
The sign that we use in printing, which is a question
Oh,
mark.
I see. The actual punctuation shape.
And you've got to take it back right to Latin, I think.
It's an ear and an eardrop.
Looks like that.
Oh, well, I was just going to say it was it was a musical clef gone sort of upside down. But if it's Latin now...
Think of the Latin for question.
Questione.
Yes, questione. You got that, questione.
Oh, it's like a Q, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Yes, that's right.
It doesn't look mine, does it? It's like a Q at all.
It doesn't to me either. But you're right. I mean, this is a 1.5. The original printer's sign, or maybe the original manuscript sign, perhaps before printing, was Q over O, which is an abbreviation of the Latin questio, which means question.
Oh, yes.
Denis Norden. A square, in the modern sense of a middle-aged outsider, traditionalist, and so on.
Well, it's a funny word, actually, isn't it? Because it's done a complete turnabout of meaning. Do you remember that song? Her name is Mary, Mary. Remember?
Yeah.
Because it says in that, because there is something there that sounds so square. It's a grand old meaning. It sounds so right.
It was originally honest, straightforward.
I would think that would be the derivation of it, because if you take square as meaning four square, standing for all the kind of old values, I think this word came about roughly when people, or young people, started rejecting the old values. Therefore, four square took on a derogatory meaning.
I give you 1.5 again, because I believe there may be several origins to this phrase. It did originally mean honest or straightforward, particularly among the criminal classes, curious enough, and they got somebody who went straight. But according to Eric Partridge, it's a jazz musician's steady 1, 2, 3, 4 rhythm without any variations or syncopations, a rather pedestrian measure, and if you think of his hand beating the time, it makes a square.
I bet it could come from a square head equally.
It might do that. It might even come from square dancing, I think. Old-fashioned music of that kind. Anyway, 1.5. Dilys Powers is, I think, more precise. A stickler over trifles.
Well, it's somebody who sticks.
You might have a stick. If you remember, Romeo, when Mercutio was fighting Tybalt, he tried to stop the fight, and it was unlucky because Tybalt's sword went through and hit Mercutio.
He got stickled himself.
Yeah, so what was Romeo trying to do? He was
trying to stickle them. He was trying to stop them and break off the fight.
Yeah.
And end the
losing fight.
I'm going to give you 1 out of 2. The stickler was the umpire in originally a tournament, a jousting tournament, or in a duel. A man who thought very carefully about etiquette if the chap was making the wrong pass. And therefore he became an umpire or mediator. And it means to interpose between the combatants. And he's a referee. Well, now we come to a much easier for me, do-it-yourself round, in which each member of the team is invited to coin a word to enrich our already sort of fairly rich language with a word of their own invention or manufacture, which they find they've got a pretty urgent need for. 2 marks if it really makes any sense at all. And now I'd like to know the word and what you say you think it means. Frank Muir.
There are so many unusual and beautiful and interesting and splendid words. I don't want to add to them, but I think that if I can quote from my children, when they were very young, had a couple of terribly good words. One was for that stuff, white stuff you put on roast beef, which they called horse rubbish. and one which is a perfect description of one of those weatherproofs, which are sort of tweedy, and keep the water out, but retain it themselves, which they called a Mackin's sop. I think the one I'd like to see used isn't so much a new word as a stressing of syllables in the existing one. There's a splendid old actor called Eric Chitty who wrote to me that he thought I'd be interested that his grandson had produced this. And it's a new reading of a word to describe somebody who's got up in the morning looking rather sort of worn and creased about the face and everywhere else, which his grandson called bed-raggled. I think that should be added to the language.
Well, I resist the temptation to give you 6 marks. And I shall give you a bonus, and I shall make it 3. But that horse rubbish, Macinsop, and bed-raggled seem to me some very good neologisms. Anne Scott James, your turn.
I badly feel the need of a word to describe people of the age of my husband and myself. Now, we don't very much like being called the old folk, with its sort of connotations of touching the forelock and carrying soup to the cottages. We don't like being called pensioners, because we never seem to have never yet received a penny in any description of that direction. We particularly dislike being called senior citizens. It's one of those awful bureaucratic euphemisms which really make one faint. I think when you reach our age, what you really are is nice and mature and ripe. And as nobody's allowed to be called a man or a woman anymore, I think there should be a word called a right person. People who are over 60 or over 65 in the case of a man or whatever it is. So we put right person into the dictionary.
Ripeness is all.
Right person we accept straight away.
Oh, incidentally, I was thinking of something else. I said to my husband the other day, really, you cannot talk about the upper classes anymore. And he said, no, but you can call them the Chateau Bottle.
Yes, we have that one.
Again, I'm bound to add a bonus, so 3 out of 2. Now, Denis Norden.
Well, my first thought wasn't a word, actually. It was occasioned by coming here. That what we need is a new hand signal for motorists, particularly me, going the highway code, and it simply means, I'm sorry. You know, the cases when you put your hand out to turn right and decide, no, I won't, I'll go straight on after all. You want to do something to indicate to the man behind that you know you've made a mistake and don't get all uptight, you know. And that led me to the word eureka, which we use, I found it. There should be another word, equally Greek and expressive, for I blew it. I did it wrong. And I think all these foreign words we import should have opposites, like for all the people who have charisma, there's at least 10 more who have charisma.
Well, I accept charisma with enormous gratitude. I think it goes on at Camelot or somewhere. 2 marks straight away. Dilys Powell, your turn.
Well, you see, whenever I think of a word which would suit me, I find it already exists. It's very tiresome. I wanted a word for invective and abuse to address to people who get in front of me in the queue for the potatoes. And I thought, you squinch. And I find it means an architectural support. So that doesn't really help me. But my sort of quiet life involves a good deal of standing in bus queues while going to look for the queue for the potatoes. A Dutch friend of mine used to insist that in the Dutch cavalry, the word for command to mount was scrobble op de beestes. Well, I feel, you see, that the word for what is so quietly named a bus queue, which is not a queue at all, is a mad massacre, should be a scrobble.
Again, a bonus mark for that brutal scrobble up to beasties, which I don't think one can possibly beat. And we come to the last round, and Frank and Denis's quotations, with the marks to be awarded on the length of the applause from the audience here in the theatre. And Frank, if you remember, your quotation is, hello, hello, and who's your lady friend? And I'm so ancient that I remember the next line, which is, who's the little girlie by your side? Anyway, we left Frank loose on this. It's a musical song.
Hello, hello. Had not the organist in our village said that line to me, we would never have seen probably the most triumphant production of the Thorpe Players. And we had Mr. Haddock, the church organist, was and orchestra, because he was playing the harmonium, you see. And we were going to do the Boyfriend by Sandy Wilson, but it's got rather a lot of girls in the cast, and the Thorpe Players is remarkable in having almost no girls. This is partly due to the fact that we had an influx of playful, rather sturdy lads who've come to work on the new motorway. And when they arrived, most of the girls left. So I thought if I twisted the Boyfriend and made it the girlfriend, or made it, actually I called it the lady friend, because it's rather classier, because we are in Surrey. And I had the story of these boys from the grammar school at Strood, who were school-leaving age, and the boys go to London on some kind of social project, and they're in a hostel with a lot of girls, and they sort of all fall in love, and it all went swimmingly, and then we had this inexplicable tragedy. In the middle of the night, it was a Thursday, just before opening on the Saturday, the right-hand side of the harmonium keys disappeared overnight. It was awful. It was a frightful sight. Really, it was. It was like a grin of somebody who's had the right-hand load of teeth pulled out. Just nothing. It was just a sort of couple of bass octaves left. What could have happened, and what we were going to do to open on the Saturday. Desperate. So I went round the village, and I went to our sub-postmistress, and I said, we're in trouble. I'm terribly in trouble for Saturday nights. How low can you get? And the response was terribly disappointing, and we went round all the village, trying all the ladies out for a low, because she's got to be able to sing this song. This lady, the lady friend. I could be happy with it. And we were in despair. And Mr. Haddock and I were walking round the corner of, do you know Line Lane and Thorpe? But all the diggings, you know, around there, the allotments. And there's one superb allotment kept there by Hugh Scanlon. Scanlon's an old Thorpe name. And he was this tall, cadaverous ex-grave digger, you see, with this curious face and this very deep voice. And we suddenly saw that all the rows of lettuces and sprouts and whatnot all had these shiny markers in the end. And Mr. Haddock said, they're my harmonium keys. And he was saying, where did you get those? He said, I found them in the village hall. Took them from an old disused harmonium. Push the wooden bit in the ground and you can write begonia on the ivory. Look. I thought, well, he's ruined. And suddenly Mr. Haddock said, wait a minute, talk again. He said, what do you want me to talk about? Mr. Haddock turned to me and said, quick, find a wig, an outsized dress, and high-heeled, strapped shoes, size gents number 11. So I said, what are you talking about? He said, didn't you hear his voice? It's the solution to our problems. So I said, what are you trying to tell me? And he said, we found hello, Hugh's your lady friend.
life is nothing if not eventful in Thorpe. And we go on to Denis Norden, and his quotation was, "Genius is an infinite capacity for taking pains." Thomas Carlyle and possibly several others thought about this. Denis.
Well, assuming it to be Thomas Carlyle, if not the several others, although that line is always offered as the definitive description of genius, it's not a description that I've ever accepted. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that genius, whenever I've come across it, has always revealed itself as an infinite capacity for not having to take pains. But my main quarrel with the quotation is that it only works providing you modify it or in some way amend it according to the kind of person you're applying it to. Let me explain. Take Jack Longland's territory, education. Those educationalists who advocate higher grants for university students, what their genius requires is an infinite capacity for staking brains, while those who have so successfully opposed corporal punishment, well, obviously they were gifted with an infinite capacity for breaking canes. And now, when you turn to the wider world of trade and commerce, well, you can find an abundance of examples of the fact that genius goes beyond merely taking pains. I mean, those multinational food corporations whose breakfast cereals now adorn every kitchen table in the Western world, what they clearly possess is an infinite capacity for flaking grains. While the technological genius who's filled our world with foaming detergent was quite obviously born with an infinite capacity for caking drain. Now you say you find the same need for rephrasing the quotation even when you consider the humbler, more sort of idiosyncratic areas of business enterprise. That country blacksmith who successfully revived the ancient art of manufacturing arrows for weathercocks. Would he have succeeded without an infinite capacity for making veins? While over in Denmark, the small factory owner who managed to capture the entire national market for alarm clocks, would you deny him an infinite capacity for waking dames? Even more pertinently, would the shareholders' reports of any of these enterprises have presented so rosy a picture if their accountant had not been blessed with an infinite capacity for faking gains? You could even extend this rewording to the activities of that young lady doctor in the Midlands who set herself up as what she calls a surrogate wife. In other words, rendering very practical assistance to all those young men who are worried about their sexual adequacy. How could you define her genius but an infinite capacity for quaking swains? Well, that list just about exhausts my personal pantheon of geniuses, with, of course, one very obvious exception, my distinguished colleague on the opposition bench. So I put it to you, now that you have heard his way with a narrative about an amateur dramatic society, does Thomas Carlyle's quotation come anywhere near describing Frank's ineffable gift? Of course it doesn't. With Frank Muir, there is need for one more turn of the screw. Genius is an infinite capacity for talking puns.
that's accommodated everybody from Shakespeare to Einstein. And by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Denis Norden, in fact, wins the story. But over the contest as a whole, the result is quite remarkable. It is a draw.
Taking part in My Word were Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, Denis Norden and Frank Muir. The chairman was Jack Longland. The questions were compiled by Peter Moore and the programme was produced by Tony Schreyer.